47 women agreed to do something a little strange for 6 months. They were all between 50 and 79. They were all carrying more weight than their doctors wanted them to carry. And every single one of them got the same advice about food. Cut about 500 calories a day. That was it. Same guidance, same target, same everything on the plate. Then the researchers split them into 2 groups, and they changed exactly one thing between them. Not the food, not the calories. Nobody touched the exercise. A clock. One group could eat whenever they normally ate. The other group had to fit every bite of the day inside a window of less than 9 hours and then close the kitchen. 6 months later, both groups stepped on the scale, and both groups had lost about the same amount of weight, roughly 15 pounds each. If weight was the whole story, the study would have ended right there with a shrug. But then they sat both groups down at a table and gave them a set of thinking tests. Planning, memory, attention, problem solving. The kind of quiet mental work you do 100 times a day without ever noticing you are doing it. And only one of those 2 groups came back different. I want to tell you which group, and I want to tell you exactly which parts of the mind moved and which parts stubbornly did not move at all. Because that second half matters just as much as the first, and almost nobody is repeating it. But I am going to make you wait for it, because if I hand you the answer now, you will not understand why it is interesting. And there is something you need to know about your own day first. Let me start with the thing nobody counts. For as long as any of us have been alive, every single piece of advice about food and the aging mind has been about the plate. Eat more of this. Eat less of that. Fish is good. Sugar is bad. Olive oil, blueberries, leafy greens, walnuts. Whole magazines have been built on the contents of the plate, and there is real science behind a lot of it. I am not here to tell you that food does not matter, but look at what every one of those recommendations has in common. Every single one of them answers the question, what? Not one of them answers the question, when. Think about your own kitchen for a second. If I asked you what you ate yesterday, you could probably tell me. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, maybe something in between. Most people can walk through it. Now let me ask you the other question. What time did the first thing go in your mouth yesterday? Not breakfast. The first thing. The splash of milk in the coffee counts. That half a cookie on the counter counts. And what time did the last thing go in? Not dinner. The last thing. The handful of crackers in front of the television counts. Subtract one from the other and you have a number that describes your day just as accurately as anything on your plate does. Most people have never calculated it. Most people have never even thought of it as a number. That number has a name. Researchers call it your eating window. And when a group of scientists finally went and measured it in ordinary people, what they found was not what anyone expected. The measuring happened at the Salk Institute in California. A team there built a simple smartphone app and asked more than 150 people to photograph everything they put in their mouths for 3 weeks. Not to change anything. Not to diet, just to photograph it. Every coffee, every snack, every glass of juice, time-stamped automatically. The idea was to find out what normal actually looks like, because up to that point, everyone had been relying on people writing it down from memory. And people are generous with themselves when they write things down from memory. What came back off those phones did not match what anybody had been assuming. The polite fiction we all carry around is that a normal person eats 3 meals a day. Morning, midday, evening. Neat, contained maybe 11 or 12 hours from the first bite to the last. That is not what the phones showed. For more than half of the people in that study, food was going into the body across 15 hours or longer. Not 3 meals. A slow drip that started with coffee before dawn and did not truly finish until the last bite in front of the evening news. And the shape of it was strange too. Less than a quarter of the day's calories were going in before noon. More than a third of the day's calories were going in after 6 in the evening. The heaviest end of the day was the back end. Now, none of that tells you it is harmful. All it tells you is that it is happening and that almost nobody knows it is happening to them, which is a different kind of finding and honestly a more useful one because you can go check your own number tonight. The same team did one more thing with that group, and it is the part people forget. They took a handful of the participants whose windows were running past 14 hours and asked them to pull it in to 10 or 11 hours for about 4 months. Nobody told them to change the food. They did not hand them a diet, only the hours. Those people lost some weight, which you might have guessed, but they also came back reporting 2 things nobody had asked them to report. They said they had more energy during the day, and they said they were sleeping better at night. That is self-reported, and self-reported is the soft end of evidence. People who volunteer for a study and then change something tend to tell you it went well, but it was enough to make the question look worth chasing, and chasing is exactly what happened next. Here's a small thing worth doing before we go any further, with one caution attached to the front of it. if you live with diabetes, if you take anything that lowers your blood sugar, if you are underweight, or if you have any history with disordered eating, then watching the clock around food is a conversation to have with your doctor first and not a thing to start because a video suggested it. For everybody else, this costs nothing. For the next 3 days, write down 2 times, first bite, last bite, nothing else. No calories, no photographs, no judgment, just 2 numbers a day. Most people who do that are surprised. They come back with 14, 15, sometimes 16 hours, and they say the same thing every time. I had no idea it was that spread out. That is the number the researchers were interested in. So where did the idea come from that the number might matter at all? It came from mice, and it came a while back. In 2012, a team published a study that made a lot of people sit up. They took mice and put them on a rich, fatty diet, the kind of diet that reliably makes a mouse fat and sick. Then they split them in 2. One group could eat that diet whenever they wanted, around the clock, nibbling at all hours the way mice do. The other group got the exact same food, and here's the part that matters, the exact same number of calories. But they could only get at it during an 8-hour stretch of the day. The rest of the time, the food was gone. Same diet, same calories. Only the hours were different. The mice with the 8-hour window did not get fat. Their livers stayed cleaner. Their blood work stayed calmer. And they moved better, too. And the ones eating around the clock did what you would expect mice on a fatty diet to do. That result landed hard because it broke a rule everybody thought was unbreakable. A calorie is a calorie is a calorie. Same fuel in, same result out. That study said the same fuel, delivered on a different schedule, gave a different result. Now, before anybody gets carried away, those were mice. A mouse is nocturnal, has a metabolism running at a completely different speed from yours, and lives about 2 years. I have lost count of how many things worked beautifully in a mouse and then did absolutely nothing in a person. So the mouse study was not an answer, it was a question. And it took years for that question to reach the one group of people who might benefit most from the answer, which is people over 60 who are watching their own thinking and quietly wondering about it. Before it got there, though, the idea had to survive an obvious objection, and it very nearly did not. The objection goes like this. Of course, people who shrink their eating window lose weight. You closed the kitchen for 4 extra hours. You took away the evening snacking. Nobody discovered a metabolic secret there. You simply made eating harder, so people ate less. Weight came off, and weight coming off is what did all the good. That is a fair objection, and it is exactly the kind of objection good science is supposed to take seriously. So somebody tested it. In 2020, a trial published in a major medical journal put the popular 16 and 8 pattern head-to-head against ordinary 3 meals a day. 12 weeks. Real people. And the result was deflating for everyone who had been championing the shorter window. The time-restricted group did lose a little more weight on average, but the difference was not statistically significant, meaning it was small enough that it could easily have been chance. And when the researchers looked at why the time-restricted group had lost anything at all, the likeliest explanation was almost boring. They had simply eaten somewhat fewer calories without especially trying, because they had fewer hours in which to eat. That study cooled the whole field off for a while, and it should have. If shrinking your eating window is only a slightly awkward way of eating a bit less, then it is not a discovery. Call it a rearranged deck chair, which left one question standing, and it is the question that brings us all the way back to those 47 women. If you hold the weight loss steady, so that both groups lose exactly the same amount, is there anything left over? Is there anything the clock does that the scale does not explain? That is a very hard study to design, and that is precisely what the team at Rutgers University built. Here is how they built it. 47 women, ages 50 to 79, all carrying extra weight, all past menopause. That group was chosen on purpose because women in that band carry a higher statistical risk of cognitive decline later on, so if there is an effect to find, it should be findable there. Every woman in the study, both groups, got counseling to cut about 500 calories a day. That is the same instruction for everybody. Nobody was told to eat differently from anybody else about what went on the plate. 26 of them were then asked to fit all of that food inside a window of less than 9 hours. In practice, they generally ate between 10 in the morning and 6 in the evening. Their actual measured average came out to 8.2 hours a day. The rest of the women kept a normal schedule, spread across just over 12 hours. And one detail inside that 10 to 6 pattern turns out to matter to the researchers a great deal. If your last bite is at 6 and you are in bed by 10, you have put roughly 4 hours of empty time between eating and sleeping. The lead researcher singles that out specifically. Not only the length of the window, but where you put the end of it. 6 months. Same calorie target for everybody, same weight loss for everybody, about 15 pounds aside. Then came the testing. And I want to be careful here, because this is where most retellings of this study go sloppy. They say the 9-hour group did better on brain tests and move on. That is not good enough because there were 4 different kinds of tests, and they did not all say the same thing. The first kind measured spatial planning and problem solving. That sounds abstract, so let me make it ordinary. It is the mental work of looking at a situation, seeing several moves ahead, and picking an order. It is what you are doing when you plan a route through the grocery store so you are not doubling back. And it is what you are doing when you look at a full dishwasher and a sink of pans and work out what goes where. The second kind measured errors on memory and learning tasks. Not whether you can memorize a poem, how many mistakes you make while holding something in your head and using it, where you set the glasses down, which of the 3 things you came into the room for. The third kind measured multitasking, holding 2 demands at once and switching between them without dropping either. And the fourth measured reaction time, raw speed, how fast the signal gets from the eye to the hand. 4 different mental muscles. 1 eating window, 6 months. So here is what actually came back. On spatial planning and problem solving, the women in the 9-hour group showed a real improvement compared to the women eating across 12 hours. Statistically significant. That one held up. On memory and learning errors, the 9-hour group made fewer mistakes, and this is the part I need you to hear precisely. That difference was a trend. It pointed in the good direction, but it did not reach statistical significance. Which means the honest reading is that it might be real and it might be noise, and this study was too small to tell you which. I should stop and explain that phrase because it gets thrown around on the news as though it were decoration, and it is not decoration. Statistically significant is a threshold researchers agree on ahead of time. It asks a blunt question. If there were truly no difference between these 2 groups, how often would pure luck hand me a gap this big anyway? If the answer is often enough to worry about, the finding does not clear the bar, and you are supposed to treat it as unproven no matter how much you like the direction it points. So when a result clears that bar, as the planning result did, you are allowed to lean on it a little. When it does not clear the bar, as the memory result did not, the correct response is to write it down and go run a bigger study. It is not to put it in a headline. And on the other 2, multitasking and reaction time, there was no meaningful difference at all. Nothing. The 9-hour group was not quicker, and it was not better at juggling. So the headline you will see everywhere, that time-restricted eating improves the aging brain, is doing an enormous amount of work with the word improves. What actually happened is narrower and stranger than that. One specific ability moved. One leaned in a good direction without proving it. 2 did not budge. There is one more finding, and it is the one I find hardest to dismiss. The women who shrank their window the most showed the biggest improvements. The size of the change tracked the size of the effect. In research, that kind of dose relationship is one of the small signals that makes people take a preliminary result more seriously than they otherwise would, because pure chance does not usually line up in a neat row like that. And the researcher who ran the whole thing, Sue Shapses, a nutrition scientist at Rutgers, used one word to describe the size of what she found. Modest, not breakthrough, not revolutionary, modest. That is the word from the person who has seen all the data, and I think that word is the most trustworthy thing in the entire story. Now I have to slow down and put a break on this, because everything I have just told you comes with limits, and the limits are not fine print. They are the story. Start with the size. 47 people. That is not a large trial, that is a pilot. A pilot study exists to find out whether a bigger study is worth running. It is a scout, not a verdict. With 47 people split into 2 groups, a handful of individuals having a good day at the testing table can tilt a result. Second, and this one is important, these findings were presented at a scientific conference, the American Society for Nutrition meeting held at the end of July in National Harbor, Maryland. They have not yet been through peer review. Peer review is the stage where other scientists in the same field pull the work apart and look for the mistakes the authors could not see. Until that has happened, a result is a claim, not a conclusion. Third, listen to what the outside experts said rather than what the headlines said. Wendy Hall, a professor of nutritional sciences at King's College London who had nothing to do with this study, told reporters that avoiding late evening meals is a plausible idea for supporting the aging mind. Plausible. And then she said it is too early to tell whether the improvements are actually tied to the eating schedule or whether they are large enough to matter in a real life. Fourth, and maybe most important for whoever is watching this, every person in that study was a woman between 50 and 79 who was overweight or obese and past menopause. That is who was studied. That is who the result describes. If you are a man, this study does not tell you what happens to you. If you are at a healthy weight, it does not tell you either. Younger than 50, same answer. The result for those people is not different. Nobody has looked yet. And fifth, the plainest one. Nothing in this study says that shrinking your eating window prevents dementia. Nobody was followed long enough for anybody to know that. Cognitive test scores over 6 months and dementia over 20 years are two different mountains. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. There is one more thing on the other side of the ledger, and I would be doing you a disservice to leave it out, because it is the thing that keeps me from getting excited. 2 years ago, at a meeting of the American Heart Association, researchers presented an analysis of more than 20,000 American adults. Preliminary work, a conference abstract, not peer-reviewed. I am telling you that before I tell you the number, because the number is the kind that gets shouted without its label. The people with eating windows under 8 hours a day showed a 91% higher rate of death from cardiovascular disease than people eating across 12 to 16 hours. An association, please note. Not a demonstrated cause, and not a prediction about any one person. That number went around the world, and it deserves the same scrutiny I just applied to the good news. It was also preliminary, and it has not been through peer review either. It was also a conference abstract. And it was observational, which means it watched what people were already doing rather than assigning them to do it. Observational studies cannot separate the eating window from everything else about a person who has a very short one. Somebody eating in a 6-hour window might be doing it deliberately for health, or might be skipping meals because they are ill, or broke, or grieving, or working a schedule that grinds them down. The study cannot tell those people apart. So we have two preliminary findings from two conferences pointing in what look like opposite directions. Both of them involve the same basic idea, and both of them are held together with tape. I do not find that discouraging. I find it clarifying. This is what an unsettled question looks like from the inside before it gets settled. And it is the single best argument I know for not rearranging your life around any one study, including the one at the top of this story. So what would even explain it if the effect turns out to be real? Nobody knows, and the researchers say so plainly. What they have is a short list of suspects they intend to chase next. The first suspect is the body clock. Almost every organ you own runs on a daily rhythm, and food is one of the strongest signals your body uses to set those rhythms. The proposal is that eating at wildly different times, or eating right up to bedtime, muddies that signal, and that holding food inside a consistent stretch of daylight hours would clean it up. Nobody tested that here. It is a theory waiting on evidence. The second suspect is what happens during the long gap. If your last bite is at 6 and your first is at 10 the next morning, your body spends a long uninterrupted stretch not processing food. Blood sugar settles. Insulin settles. And once the easy fuel is gone, the body starts drawing on stored fat and producing ketones, which the brain can burn quite happily. The third suspect is inflammation, which tends to quiet down when metabolic health improves, and which has been circling the conversation about brain aging for a long time. And the fourth is simply metabolic health in general, which improved in both groups here because both groups lost weight. Notice that all 4 of those are hypotheses. None of them was measured in this study. The researchers were careful to say that this trial was not designed to explain why anything happened, only to see whether anything happened at all. So let me tell you what I think you are actually left with, and I want to be very plain about what this is and what it is not. What follows is not instruction. I am not telling you to eat between 10 and 6. I am not telling you to skip breakfast or to close your kitchen at a particular hour, and I would be stepping way outside what any of this evidence supports if I did. Meal timing interacts with medications, with blood sugar, with kidneys, with appetite, with sleep, and with a dozen things that are specific to you and invisible to me. What I think you are left with is a question that is genuinely worth carrying around, which is more than most health news gives you. The question is this. You have been asked about your plate your entire adult life. You have probably never once been asked about your clock. And for the first time, there is a piece of real, if fragile, evidence suggesting the clock is not neutral. Now that does not mean food stops mattering, and nobody is claiming it does. What it means is narrower and sharper than that. In one small study, when the plate was held identical for everybody and the scale moved identically for everybody, the clock was the only thing left standing that could explain the difference between the two groups. On that one question, the hour mattered more than the menu. That is a much smaller claim than the headlines made, and it is the only one the data supports. You can go and find your own number without changing a single thing you eat. First bite, last bite, 3 days. With the caution I gave you earlier still standing, that measurement commits you to nothing. And if that number surprises you, which it does surprise most people, then you have learned something true about your own day that no study had to tell you. Whether it is worth doing anything about it is not my call, and it is honestly not the internet's call either. If you take one thing from all of this, take the question to the person who knows your medications, your history, and your blood work, and ask them what they think. Talk to your doctor before you change how or when you eat. That is not a formality. With meal timing in particular, it is the whole ballgame. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you found this useful, the kindest thing you can do is leave a comment telling me whether the question itself was new to you, because I read them, and because I suspect most people have never once been asked about their clock. Please keep anything private about your own health where it belongs, which is with your doctor and not in a comment section. Take care of yourself, and keep asking when, not only what.